Hello, welcome everybody. We are super thrilled today to be welcoming two authors of the book Crimson Letters, Voices from Death Row. For those of you who have not had a chance to read it, it is one of the most beautiful books I have read in a really long time, and I absolutely loved it, and I'm really excited to talk to two of the authors from the book today. I wanted to welcome first Tessie Castillo. Tessie is a freelance journalist based in Raleigh, North Carolina. She specializes in criminal justice, drug policy, and harm reduction. And in 2014, she became one of the first members of the public invited into North Carolina's death row. This extraordinary opportunity, as well as the correspondence that she developed with several death row residents, helped launch her passion for criminal justice reform. Crimson Letters, Voices from Death Row is her first book. I also wanted to welcome her co-author, George Wilkerson, who has not been able to join us yet, but will be joining us in about 15 minutes. It'd be great if we could put his photo up as I introduce him. George Wilkerson is an award-winning writer, an artist, and poet currently incarcerated on North Carolina's death row. In 2018, he won a PEN Award for his essay, Limp Gray Fur, was a finalist for the Kathy Smith Bowers Chapbook Contest, and won a gold award in the Capitalizing on Justice art competition. In addition to being the editor for Compassion, a newsletter for people on death row, his work has appeared in multiple philanthropic platforms and exhibitions, including Hidden Voices, The Upper Room, The Marshall Project, Windows on Death Row, the Corrections Accountability Project, and Lifelines Collective. In 2019, he was a finalist for an Ellie Award. Welcome both to Tessie and to George.
Thank you.
All right, so let's get started. So Tessie, for those who haven't had the pleasure of reading the book yet, can you tell us how you came to write this book and how you came to know your co-authors, including George Wilkerson?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I did want to say, first off, just to let people know that when George calls in, he's going to be calling from Central Prison, from death row, in about 15 minutes. And he's going to call my cell phone, and I'm going to put him into the Zoom. So there will be just a brief 30 seconds or so as I'm putting him into the Zoom meeting, just so you're aware that that's what's going to be happening. I got involved back in 2014 through just the way that life throws things at you that you don't expect. It was actually via the Super Bowl. I was at a Super Bowl party in Durham, and I'm not much of a football person, I confess, so I was not really paying attention to the game. And a man wandered over and started talking to me, and turns out that he was a psychologist who worked inside Central Prison on death row. And he had been advocating to try to open up death row to allow people from the community to come in and teach classes like yoga or writing or restorative justice or anger management or arts. Up until then, death row had been very closed off. There wasn't really anyone allowed in there from the public. They had no access to phones. The men were only allowed one 10-minute phone call per year. So it was very, very isolated. And this psychologist was trying to change that. And that year, 2013, 2014, they got a new warden at the prison who decided to allow some of the volunteers to come into the prison. And so I was able to go in. I was really excited. And I started teaching a writing class to about 24 guys who were on death row. And while I was there, the writing class was encouraging them to write about growing up, about where they came from, how they got to death row, but also really importantly, what they'd been doing with the time since they'd been there. Because most of them who I was working with had been on death row already for 10, 20, or even 30 years. Some of them had been on death row longer than they had been off of death row because they had come in as teenagers. And so I wanted to know, what are you doing with your life now? And so we started teaching the class, and I was very moved by what I was seeing and the amount of just growth that I had seen from the guys in the class. So I wrote an editorial to the News and Observer about teaching and about some of my observations. And about a week later, I received a pretty terse letter from the warden telling me that my services were no longer required and they canceled my class. So after that, I decided to continue a written correspondence with the people who had been my students. And I was writing to them, and their letters were just as insightful as our in-person conversations had been. So I put out the idea to a few of the writers, why don't we put together a book? Let's tell your stories. What was your life like before prison? And how do you find purpose and meaning even being on death row? And so that became Crimson Letters.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Tessie, one thing I was really struck with about this book is the theme of friendship, and which is just so relevant to all of us. It's such a universal concept, and the friendship that you formed with these men, including George. And if I may just read from a passage in the book, starting on page 16, for anybody who has the book. You explain that you and George started becoming pen pals and corresponding quite a bit. And then several months in, you say his tone changed. And he says, it's been several years since anyone new has entered my life, and I could see myself getting close to them, he wrote. You're the first person in like 4 years. I'll be honest, I've about given up on writing letters, thinking I can have any real relationships via correspondence. Every time a person fades away, it hurts me. I started going numb, Tess. I'm at a low point in my life. If I can't connect to others emotionally, I can't be human. His letter continued, asking me to commit to friendship. No drifting apart, no forgetting to write or to stop writing to him. He feared watching the letters dry up as new relationships and responsibilities entered my world, while his need for friendship stayed constant. In a follow-up letter, he wrote, many volunteers like you have come into our lives, people who get to know us, see our vulnerabilities, who tell us we've changed their lives, who tell us how important it is to keep sharing our humanity, who tell us they care about us and our friends. Yet they keep their distance emotionally. Their mouths and hearts are doing two different things. George explained the difference between seeing men in prison as human and valuing them as individuals. Outside prison, most people view each other as human beings and sympathize with others' pain. But death row residents struggle even for the basic recognition that they are people. Labeling them monsters makes it easier to justify executing them. George wanted more than pity. He wanted people to see him as an individual with a distinct personality, interests, strengths, and flaws. He wanted people to care about him because of his uniqueness. When I told you that I was at a low point and that I felt if I couldn't connect to others emotionally, I couldn't be human, a large part of it flowed from my experience with the volunteers here, he said. My family and friends from the street had already faded away. He then goes on to talk about, to expand on this. And then you go on to say, George's plea for a meaningful long-term friendship moved me because it resembled a similar appeal I had once made. A couple years prior, my husband's sudden request for divorce had left me so distrustful, I hesitated even to let friends into my life. I had expressed these insecurities to a woman whose understanding and patience helped break down my walls. We later became best friends. Recognizing that one person's commitment to friendship can restore the trust destroyed by another's betrayal, I agreed to be a friend, a real friend to George.
I will answer that in just a question, but he's calling in right now, so I'm gonna let him.
Perfect timing.
or unmute yourself by pressing *6. You are unmuted.
Okay. So he should be in the meeting now. He needs to be let in. It's a phone number. Yeah, there he is. George, can you hear us? George, can you hear us?
Hello?
Hey, can you hear us?
Yeah, now.
Okay.
It was silent a moment ago.
Welcome, welcome. We are here with Duke Law School and Yvette, who's moderating. She just asked me a question about how we became friends. So I will answer that question and then we'll turn it right over to you. All right?
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
Welcome, George. Thanks so much for joining us.
thanks.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So you can jump
Absolutely.
in, George, if I say something wrong about how we became friends.
Okay.
Yeah. And Tessie, I wonder if you wanted to put up George's photo or if you want to wait until he starts talking in a bit. Up to
Sure, I
you.
can wait till he talks. So basically, when I started getting involved with guys on death row, I was willing to be open to the fact that they might not be quite the monsters that members of the public might expect from them to be. But I was still very much holding back a lot. Like not really willing to be proximate, as Brian Stevenson says, not willing to be a real friend, very much keeping a lot of myself hidden out of fear that you can't really form a true, honest and healthy friendship with someone who's been convicted of a violent crime. So it was George whose letter that Yvette just read really showed me my own hypocrisy. And how can you expect someone to be a good friend to you if you're not being a good friend to them? And hadn't I made that plea myself in my own life? And so after that, I decided to treat George and everyone else on death row as I would treat anyone else who was outside of prison. And that doesn't mean, I mean, just like you're discerning in the real world about who you trust and who you form friendships with and how much you disclose. I really started to apply that to death row as well, and to decide, who's trustworthy and who's not, and if they are, to be a real friend and open and don't hold back just because of where they're located. And that took my friendship with George and my relationship with the other co-authors as well to just a really deeper level, which enabled us to collaborate on Crimson Letters and to get through all of the messiness that it was to write a book with 5 co-authors. And it was, messy sometimes. Thanks.
Fantastic. Yeah, Tessie, did you want to hand the mic over to George at this point? Okay, great.
You have anything to
Hello?
add about that, George?
Oh no, I think you pretty much covered it well. I mean, I would just be, putting too fine a point on it.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to give us a little bit of an introduction first about yourself and what some of your interests are?
Sure. My name is George Wilkerson. I have been incarcerated for 17 years now. As a matter of fact, January 11th made 17 years. I have been writing and involved in activism since 2013. And so since 2013, when I started taking a writing class, I realized that I did have something to say, that despite being here, writing empowered me. Because one of the things we studied in that first writing class were, the title of the class is called Writing from Captivity, actually. So we studied all these writers from throughout history who were incarcerated or in captivity in some form. So, for example, Paul, who wrote much of the New Testament, literally wrote some of the Bible itself from a dungeon setting. So I'm like, if this guy was in a dungeon and can write something as powerful as Scripture, I mean, now, no doubt, I'm not saying I'm writing Scripture, but just the impact that his writings have had over the course of 2,000 years, billions of people. Dr. Martin Luther King wrote some of his letters from the jail, and they're still studied and read today and continue to impact lives in a positive way. So it just showed me that despite being in prison, I do have power at my disposal if I can have a pen and some paper and if I had something actual worthy to say. And so for the past 8.5 years, that's what I've been trying to do, is find something that I could contribute to the conversation about, mass incarceration, the conditions of confinement, social issues, that kind of contribute to someone, or that contribute to a lot of people coming to prison. So that's what I've been focused on for the past almost a decade now.
Fantastic. George, as I said earlier, this your book is, and your writing in particular, is just really, really beautiful, and really just touched me as a reader in so many ways. One thing I wanted to explore with you is your early childhood, that you wrote so honestly and vulnerable, and with such vulnerability and rawness in the book. On page 26, you describe a fight that you saw when you were a kid between your father and a family friend or a relative. And then you say this, that towards the end of the fight, you say this, and just like that, his rage melted away, meaning your father, leaving an empty face in its wake, which was even scarier for some reason. Later, he'd be diagnosed with schizophrenia, and this was the blank face I'd see shapeshift on a daily basis. But right then, it appeared serene, bellied only by his heaving chest and his blood-soaked, crumpled, shivering hands. Henry Kane was still. I was sure he was dead. My dad wobbled to his feet and told us to get in the car. We left, but that night didn't leave me. I was really struck by that as one of the first scenes of violence that you encountered at such a young age. You then talk a lot about your father and the ongoing violence you face. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, like you said, that was a recurrent theme in my life. That was, like you said, perhaps the first most just overtly brutal act that I saw in my dad, and it just escalated from there. Maybe not in that such an extreme form, but he became more abusive at home with us, verbally and physically. And it culminated. It had a couple, what I call a couple of culminations, where it just got really, really bad, and he just lost it so bad that he tried to kill me or tried to kill one of my brothers. So like when I was 12 years old, for example, we were living in the projects, and my dad just, I can't even remember what it was, because sometimes when he would lose it, it wasn't over anything warranted. It could be something as simple as I spilled an ashtray or something, or I didn't move fast enough if he told me to go do something. And so this was one of those nights, and he just lost it and started beating me. Then he just, picked me up by my throat and just was literally choking the life out of me. And my older brother intervened and attacked our dad so that I could break free. And, I escaped from that. He had been, so the beatings had been going on for years at this point. And, so I ran out of the apartment, ran to a friend's apartment in the same neighborhood, and, was explaining to them through tears what happened. And him and his mom were like, look, you've got to call the cops. And in the projects, calling the cops for anything was taboo. Like, you just did not call the cops ever in the projects for anything on anyone. That just was the nature of that environment. I mean, it was a crime-ridden environment. Everyone, it seemed like, was doing something illegal, so the cops were like the enemy of everyone in the project. So for them to tell me to call the cops was huge. I didn't miss that at that time, but they convinced me, and so I did call the cops. And when the cops showed up, I told them what happened. Like, I just told them about the years of abuse. My dad just was beating us, and how in school they would tell us, if you're being abused at home, you need to ask for help. And so this is the one time that I actually reached out for that type of help. And the cops escorted me home. They put me in the patrol car and, had the lights flashing. And we pulled up to the parking lot in front of our apartment, and my dad's just standing out there, like, smirking at this scene of me coming out of the car with these two cops. And it was a black cop and a white cop. So it wasn't like a racial thing or anything like that. And they escorted me to my dad, and they confronted him with everything that I had said, like, about the abuses, about what I described as the attempted murder that night. And my dad didn't deny it. He owned it. He was like, yeah, it's true. Every bit of it's true. And, one of the cops had his hand on my back and was kind of like trying to comfort me, rubbing my back and letting me, reassuring me. And they just looked at my dad, and then they looked at me, and then he said, well, you must have done something to deserve it. And he just pushed me right back to my dad. And my dad stepped to the side, and, I went into the apartment. And that was a night I kind of just gave up on reaching out for help, to authority figures. I just kind of like lost all hope in government officials and everything at that point, because, when I reached out for help, they just weren't there for me. I felt really betrayed by that. But that was just, one night. But that was kind of like representative of just how it was in at home, just living like that for all those years.
Mhm. And then later on, in a different story, I think this one is The Places in Between. It starts off with this sort of fleeting, idyllic family life that you shared with your brothers and your mom and dad, your mom being from Korea and your dad having been a soldier, and that's how they met, and describing these kind of funny and joyful scenes. And then later you talk about another incident where your father came to beat you and your brother, and this time you really, really stood up to him and said, stop this. And your brother said, Dad, this stops today, right fucking now. Do you understand me? I screamed so hard, white flecks of foam speckled his cheeks. Dad, we are your sons, not your fucking punching bags. And your brother, it sounds like, got a hold of your father, and your dad quit struggling and looked back and forth between us, you say, tears brimmed his eyes. Finally, my boys have become men, he said with pride. Speechless, Mike and I looked at each other, then back at our dad. All right, damn it, I promise. Now let me go of you. Let me go, and you crazy sons of bitches. And that was that. He never attacked us again.
Yeah, that was the last time he tried to attack us. And from his perspective, how he rationalized it was that he was training us all those years. Like, he was trying to toughen us up. My dad was real cynical, and he was schizophrenic. But in his mind, this all made perfect sense. Like, once my mom left him, I think that was the ultimate betrayal for him. And so he had seen so much in his life already. He saw us as his soldiers, and he was training us for war. He was preparing us for the world. I mean, when I was 11 years old, he started like sending me on missions around the neighborhood to against people that he had a beef with or whatever. He'd send me to bust windows or cut car tires or sabotage doors or set booby traps on people's doors or fight other kids or whatever. And so at that moment, right there in that room, that scene that you described was like, we finally finished boot camp from his perspective. Like, we had finally grown.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
That we would stand up to the thing that we most feared. And at that time, the thing that we most feared was him. And it was a literal life and death situation. And, after that, we earned his respect. Like, he never tried to touch us again. Now, he would lose it and run his mouth, but he never tried to physically touch us again after that night. After that day.
Thank you, George. I know that you have to jump off and then call right back in.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's great.
You have 30 seconds remaining.
We'll wait on that. And when you come, and when you come back, we'd love to hear just, how you internalized all this, and since then, how you've sort of made sense of your childhood and your future. So we'll talk to you when you're back.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. I've heard him tell that story many times, but still oh man.
Yeah. And Tessie, of course, I have a million questions, but please jump in with your questions or anything that you think is important for George to touch on.
Sure, I will. If you have any questions for me, or from the audience too, while we're waiting for him to call back, it could take a couple minutes. Or not, he's gonna try.
This is a global tele prepaid call from George Wilkerson, an inmate at Central.
Thanks everybody for your patience. And at some point, I think Tessie's going to put up the website to order from her book, if you want to order her book, I should say. It's no longer available on Amazon at this point, but through her website, she can make sure that we can get the books. And again, we have about 15 minutes with George when he joins us. So if you have questions, yeah, please throw them into the chat.
Thank you for your patience. He's in now.
You
So,
are muted. You can mute or
let me
unmute
unmute
yourself
him.
by pressing *6. You
Okay.
are unmuted.
George, can you hear us? George? Sometimes it takes a minute. Hey, can you hear us?
Yeah, now.
Okay. Thank you. We're back in.
Okay. So do you want me to answer the question that you asked right before we hung up?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay, that was a great question, by the way. And you asked how I internalized it and how that shaped me and like how it continues to impact my future now and my future. Well, to use like the continue with the military theme or whatever, you know, they train guys in boot camp to respect orders, to listen, you know, to obey like blindingly. Like just if someone tells you to duck, you need to duck. You don't need to sit there questioning it like, well, why am I supposed to duck? And so like it kind of trained some of my reactions into me. You know what I mean? Like, for example, if I got into a fight, one thing my dad used to like beat into us was, you know, if you get into a fight, you better not lose, or you'll be losing twice, because if you come home and I find out you lost, then I'm gonna beat you too. And so he's like, you know, if you get into a fight, you have to assume that the other person is seriously trying to hurt you, that they're trying to kill you, that it's always a life or death situation. And I heard that all the time, every day, because we were fighting every day in the neighborhood. And so when I would get into a fight, that's how it felt to me. It always felt life or death. And so I would fight as if it was life or death. And so I really felt like I was, you know, fighting for my life. And ultimately, those types of fights get really brutal. They get really bloody. You know, people get hurt. They get seriously injured because you're not fighting just to fight. You're fighting because this person is trying to kill you. You know, and so that just it really impacted me heavily in that way. But it also shaped the way that I see the world. And recently, I was talking to a friend, and this is to show you how it has continued to impact me. And she said something, and in my mind, I was hearing like the subtext, right? Because out in the streets and in this world, sometimes people don't approach you directly. They say things indirectly. So like there's a message behind what they're saying, but it's not what they're actually saying. And so when I confronted her about it, she was like, no, I meant what I said. You know, why would you think I meant this other thing? Why would you think I was implying this other thing? And I realized that it was because of the way that I grew up. It was the way that I was brought up to survive and to you know, listen to the things that aren't said. And so now I'm learning this idea of frame switching, where I'm aware of the thought processes in my head that go on when people talk to me, but it's like I have to switch to this other culture, right? This regular world culture where it's like, no, this person doesn't mean it that way. This is how they're meaning it. And so it continues to impact me. And it's something that I'm exploring now in some of my writing, is trying to understand you know, why I think the way that I think, you know, some of these reactions that I have against people.
Thanks. I wonder if you can then, if we can shift gears to talking about your experiences now and over the past years being on death row. Can you talk to us about some of the friendships that you've made with some of the other men and some of the experiences, or really just anything you want to tell us about your experiences and what you want people to know?
Sure. Thank you for asking that question. One of the projects that I'm working on right now, it works to answer what we call the death row question, like what makes doing time on death row under a death sentence distinct from serving time with a release date. And one of the features that we came up with, because I'm collaborating on this with a professor from American University, but one of the features that we came up with was that the population on death row in North Carolina is pretty much static. So in general population, the guys, they're coming and going all the time. They've got release dates, so some might do a year or two, then they leave. The population is constantly changing. But on death row, guys stay here for 20, 30, 40 years together. So sometimes people who come in, they'll trickle in. We'll get a new guy every 2 or 3 years. And sometimes guys will get relief during the appeal process and leave death row, or they'll die of natural causes. So since I've been here since I got here in 2006, there have been no executions, but about 20 people have left death row. Either they got exonerated, or they had sentence reductions, or they found out they had unjust trials or whatever. So out of those 20 people that left death row, about 10 of them went home, and about 10 are, with reduced sentences out in regular population. About another 20 people have died since I've been here of cancer or, natural causes or whatever. But the rest of us have just been here together. So I say that because I have come to know some of these guys around me, and they've come to know me better than I know my own family, better than I knew my own friends who I was really close with on the streets. Even the guys in here that I'm not, quote unquote friends with, I know them better than I've ever known anybody out in the streets. So that's like one of the distinctive features is you kind of like against your will become family with the people around you, whether you like it or not. And so that, has all sorts of implications in terms of like how we react to each other, how we interact with each other, and what happens when we lose one of the guys in here, to cancer or whatever, how we constantly are grieving, and we're trying to wrestle with the tension between, getting close to guys and trying not to get too close because you're going to end up losing them, or they're going to end up losing you.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Tessie, I don't want to dominate here. If you wanted to ask some questions as well, or if the audience wants to jump in with questions.
If there's audience questions, this would be a great time to take them because he's only got a few minutes left. But while we're answering that, George, can you talk about some of the ways in which you cope with long-term confinement? You've been incarcerated 17 years. How do you get through that? How do you get through those long days? What keeps your hope alive?
Yeah. Well, there are several different things, right? The main one is because I'm spiritual. I identify as Christian, so everything that I do, my activism, my art, my writing, it all comes from that place. It's rooted in and it flows from my spirituality and my values as a Christian, right? So activism to me is an expression of, the love your neighbor command that God gives us. So it's like I'm literally like paying attention to ways that I can help people, and one of the ways that I can help people in here specifically is by learning about what our rights are in this place, and when our rights are violated, how to be able to identify that and fight for our rights. So my activism starts right here on the ground on my pod when, say, for example, we're denied access to the barbershop. It seems like out in the world it might be like a petty issue or something like that, but it's a constitutional right to have access to good hygiene, hygiene products, getting regular access to shaves and haircuts. And so this this specific battle I've had to fight 4 or 5 times over the past 10 years. The prison here has tried to deny us access to barbershops. And so I've had to, do the research, the legal research, frame the legal arguments, write the grievance, start that process, write the wards, start these letter campaigns. And ultimately, I have won back our access to the barbershops every time through that. But that's the type of thing that I do in here that keeps me going is, first of all, spiritually I have hope because I believe in a higher power. But also just day to day, this gives my life purpose and direction. And when I'm not doing that, and this is one of the reasons why it's so difficult for me to take a week off from working on anything, is because I start to feel really aimless and purposeless. And it's like I feel like my life is just wasting away when I'm not doing something constructive like that.
Thank you. And Claudia Benz says, thank you so much for being here today. What can we do to best support you in your work?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. One is to, become more knowledgeable about these topics, because like what Tessie described, and I include this in myself and the people that even come to death row, we all have a preconception about the type of people who get sentenced to death. We assume, the dominant perspective is that everyone here is guilty, which is not true. Or that the people that are guilty exactly of what they're accused of, which also is not true. 5 out of 7 people that come to death row nationwide ultimately leave death row. That's how high the error rate is in convicting people of a capital crime. 5 out of 7 ultimately did not warrant this sentence. So learning more about that, it changes the perception about the type of people who come here, because when our perceptions of people, it influences the way that we treat them. It influences the value we place on their lives. If our rights are being violated in here and I need outside support, it's hard to get that when people are like, well, you're on death row, you deserve to be there. Your life should be a living hell. But they don't know anything about me other than the fact that I'm here. So, one thing that people can do is just learn more about this and have these types of conversations. If you learn something from what we talked about today or from Crimson Letters, and just share that. Just have these conversations with your friends and your family. And I feel like that is the heart of the grassroots movement. That's how social change really happens. It's just by talking about these things that you learn with the people that you care about.
That's great. Does anyone else have questions? And if you do, you can just unmute your mic and ask.
I do. I want to echo the thanks for sharing your story and being here today. Really appreciate you taking the time. But I think part of what's really struck me as you've been talking is, the way you frame some of the changes you've experienced and since being incarcerated, but about changing the way you think about things and how you approach situations. And I guess what I mean to say is it feels like a more honest answer than I think sometimes people frame it as, like, people need to be rehabilitated or use kind of loaded language that implies that there's something broader wrong. Anyways, I guess my question is, how do you like to speak of it? And what do you think is the best way we can do so to help break down the stereotype that, everyone incarcerated is a monster of some sort?
Yeah, that's a great question, because like you say, it kind of implies like this ideal state for a human being, right? Like if you're in this state, then you are healthy and you are rehabilitated. But from all the people that I interact with inside and outside of prison, I honestly see no difference between us other than our geographic location. And, aside from the fact that we've been charged with what we've been charged with in here, but just in terms of the type of people and our issues that we're all wrestling with, I don't really like using the ideas of rehabilitation either, because people are really complex. So I don't know how to talk about it, honestly. I just kind of, like, when you ask me a question or Tessie asks me a question, I try to speak to it from my perspective, but I do understand that in bigger, especially political conversations, they like to use those types of terms.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
For me, I try to focus on specific issues or factors that continue to contribute to the problems that we have at hand. And if we could talk about solutions, that's always a big thing. But I really don't know how to talk about it otherwise.
No, that's helpful. Thank you so much.
It's great. We're just so grateful for you, George. If everyone wants to just
You have
unmute,
30 seconds remaining.
if everybody wants to unmute just to say thank you, that would be great.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
George.
Thank you.
Thank you, George.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and answer any of your questions. It's an honor and a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you, George. It's an honor for us too.
That's it. Thank
All
you
right.
so much for the thoughtful questions.
Yeah. Yes, thank you all. Well, Tessie, so getting back to you then, we wanted to keep talking with you. So one question I have, and George has touched on this a lot from his perspective, but from your perspective, what do you want people to take away from this book?
I love what he said about people inside prison and being outside prison being ultimately no different. And I think that after all of these years, it's been 7 years now that I've been working with these guys, writing with these guys, promoting the book with these guys, building friendships with these guys. And that's definitely something that I've come away with too, is that just the complexity of human beings, and we're all sort of struggling to be better. Or I guess I won't say everybody's struggling to be better, but you find people inside and outside prison who are not struggling to be better. And then you find people inside and outside prison who are very much on that path. And I think when in life, when we're presented with obstacles and suffering that's really intense, and that could be something like incarceration, it could be something like losing a loved one or struggling with a disease or any of those just like really intense suffering causing situations. They really present us with an opportunity to use that as a growth tool. And if you can use it as a growth tool, you can grow in incredible ways. And that's what I've seen amongst my co-authors. And so it's not to say that everyone or even the majority of people on death row do that, but the men that I've been writing, that I wrote the book with, and many others who we didn't write the book with, have just taken the experience of death row and they've used it to really blossom as people. And I'm just so amazed by that and inspired by it every day. So I want people to know that there's real growth going on in prison, and it's and they're really not any different than who you would find on the outside. There's spectrum in both places.
Thanks. Does anybody want to unmute their mic and ask a question? Otherwise, I'll just keep asking mine.
Go ahead.
Oh, Melissa. Melissa, do you want to ask your question on the mic, or if not, I can just read it, but.
Sure. Just in thinking about kind of the larger scope of justice reform and the conversations that we have around that, where does the death penalty fit in terms of your opinion and kind of given your exposure to the people who are there? What kind of conversations, I know it's kind of similar to what we talked about earlier, but in the justice realm, what kind of conversation should we be having about the death penalty and the people who are sentenced to death?
Thank you for that question. Personally, I don't believe we should have a death penalty at all. And it's not just because there's some good people on death row, but it's also just the racist roots of the death penalty in our country and the flaws within the death penalty system. George is right that 5 out of 7 people who go on to death row eventually get taken off, largely due to errors in their trials. And so that's an error rate that just completely blows my mind. And I think that it's dangerous to have a death penalty because anything less than that is seen as merciful. So we've got, okay, so if we won't give this person a death sentence, but we'll sentence them to life in prison, which is also a death sentence, just by a different name. And that's considered lenient almost, or merciful in comparison with the death sentence. And I don't think that we as people have the right to take anybody's life and I don't think we have the right to assume that they're going to stay the way that they were when the crime happened always, and that they're not going to grow during that time, because that's not the case either. So for me, any kind of justice system that is more about, like, let's just focus exclusively on punishment and let's assume that no growth is ever going to happen. I would do away with all of the justice solutions that encompass that and try to focus more on ones that recognize the capacity for growth and change in all people and bring that into account. And I would also like to see a justice system that focuses more on victims and how do we repair, how do we make things better for victims and their families, instead of just focusing on punishment as if that will make it better for victims and their families, because there's a lot more that they need that they're not getting because we're so focused just on the person who is convicted of the crime, and we're ignoring all of the other hurt and all of the other pain that is caused. So that's what I'd like to see.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Matt, could you ask your question also?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, my question was for Tessie, and I was just wondering what surprised you the most when you were reporting and collecting stories for the book?
Oh gosh, so many things. I would almost put them into two different categories. There were things about the death penalty itself that I learned that were really surprising. And then there were things about working with the guys on death row from a more personal perspective that really surprised me. I would say, as far as the death penalty, what surprised me the most is I had believed going into this, like most people, that if you're sentenced to death, then you're convicted of the kind of the worst of the worst crimes. A sort of creme de la creme of grisly crimes are who goes to death row. And I was probably most surprised to learn that that's not necessarily true. That it's almost like it's a lottery who goes to death row if you're basing it just on the crimes, because there's so many other factors, like the county that the crime occurred in, the DA in the particular district and how zealous they are about the death penalty. Race is an important factor. All of these things, obviously how much money someone has and can they hire a good attorney, and those things seem to have more impact on who goes to death row than the crime itself. So just seeing that there are people on death row who were accomplices to a murder but maybe didn't commit anything themselves, like didn't actually kill someone themselves, and they're on death row. But then maybe the person who did commit the murder is not on death row because maybe they got a better lawyer. It boggled my mind how inconsistently the death penalty is applied. And then as far as personal, so I was really scared when I put out this book. I assumed that most people think everyone on death row is monsters and that they would turn against people on death row and someone like me who writes about people on death row. And what has surprised me the most is how much support we have gotten from everywhere. I mean, we've gone into meetings of business leaders, we speak at schools and at conferences and at high schools, and we've spoken to theater groups. I mean, just such a diversity of people, and there's been so much support for us, and I've been very pleasantly surprised at that. And so have the guys, because when we started doing these talks, they were scared too, that it was just going to be an opportunity for people in the audience to attack them. And the fact that they, after spending decades inside prison and just not being heard and assuming everybody hates me, everybody thinks I'm a monster, and for them to be able to do these events where they're asked genuine, thoughtful questions and they're thanked for being there, and they get to see over and over again how many people are supportive of them, has just opened their minds and their lives in a way that you couldn't even imagine.
Wow, thanks. And why do you think that is? Why do you think there has been so much support and this has been so well received? Do you think that there's sort of a sea change in sort of public thinking, or do you think that it's because this book humanized people so much? Like, what do you think it is?
I think that so many of us, we get told these us versus them views all the time. Like, political people are always at each other's throats and people who think differently aren't getting along. But deep down, it seems like that's what we see, is that nobody gets along and we're always fighting and disagreeing when we hate each other. But if you bring it down to the level of individual people, most of us actually are really good at seeing the humanity in one another, if only given the opportunity. And so I think that bringing that proximity and putting people in situations where they could talk to someone on death row, it just automatically, our instinct, which is to connect and not to us versus them, that instinct just comes out. And I love to see it happen. It's my number one thing, and why I've been doing this for a couple years now and hope I can do it for a long time, is because I just love to see that happen over and over again, that reaching out and that connection. And yes, you're like me. It's wonderful.
Yeah, thanks. So who else has a question, or even if you don't have a question, just a thought or comment that you'd like to make?
While people are thinking, I'm putting the link to the book in the chat. Currently, you can only buy the book on my website. It was taken off of all the other platforms because we're actually coming out with a new edition, a second edition to the book this year. So we're moving out, clearing inventory for the first edition. But I did want to invite everyone, if you would like a chance to connect more with the guys on death row, we offer a free book club. Which is 5 weeks of meeting over Zoom. And at each meeting, you get to meet a different one of the authors. So there's 4 total. And each of them are a different race, a different religion, totally different background. And you'll see the conversations are very diverse with the 4 different guys. So it's completely free to join the book club. And it's just something that we meet virtually like this. And you get to do a call-in like we're doing now, except they're more intimate. The groups tend to be small. And so you really get a good opportunity to meet each one of the guys and to ask questions of each one. So I'll put that link as well if you wanted to sign up for that. And like I said, doing these kinds of presentations is what makes my day. It's what makes George's day. It means so much to all the guys. So if you are connected to a university or a conference or a church or really any kind of group, because we've talked to so many different kinds, and you would like us to come and speak to your group, please go ahead and reach out to me. This is what I do. I schedule these kinds of things, these human connecting opportunities. So please reach out if you're interested.
Thanks. And that's wonderful. What a great opportunity. Thank you. Tim, can you come off and ask your question?
Yeah, hi. So yeah, my question, Virginia has recently abolished the death penalty, right? And I just didn't know if anyone has any insight on sort of, like a straw poll of what it looks like in Raleigh, or how daunting it is, how many Republicans might be willing to, join in some type of legislation.
Mm-hmm.
I can actually answer that question.
Go ahead, please. Yep.
I used to be a lobbyist before I got here, so I'm actually very familiar with the legislature and the North Carolina legislature and the current temperature. There's definitely no appetite for abolishing the death penalty right now, not with the legislature and not even with the governor. But the group, North Carolina Coalition for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, is working on coalition building to just get different groups involved who might not have traditionally been involved with death penalty stuff, to try to build so that when the temperature changes in North Carolina, we'll be ready for it. So I would encourage you to check out that group if you're interested in getting some work done.
Great. Does anyone have any last questions? So my last question for you, Tessie, is sort of what's next for you? You're incredibly talented, and we're really lucky to have this book in the world for us. What's new? What's on tap for you next?
Well, like I said, we are coming out with a second edition this year, and we're really excited about it. So it's the same 4 guys, but it's different essays. And so they're writing about things that they didn't put into the first edition. And kind of what it is the reason that we decided to write a second edition was because there were so many really amazing questions that we were getting from these kind of events. And we realized that we didn't write about that, or I didn't talk about that aspect of my life, but people are interested in it. So the second book is a lot based on that, on kind of what are these topics, these themes that have come up during these conversations that we didn't talk about. Also, in the second book, I write pretty extensively on what it was like to write the first book. I write about the conflicts that we got into as co-authors, the difficulties, both technologically and interpersonally, of working with 5 different people, 4 of whom were in a maximum security prison, how we resolved conflicts that came up, what the issues that were very triggering for people were, and kind of what that process was like. And I also write a lot more about victims' families and the kind of work that we've done around them. So that's all stuff that's going to be in the second edition, and I'm excited.
We're excited too. We can't wait.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Tessie, and thank you also again to George Wilkerson for joining us. This has been, as someone said in the chat, just really inspirational and really like heavy, deep stuff, but just I feel really hopeful after having read the book, and really hopeful after this hour as well. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I hope to hear from some of you about doing other events or in the book club or anything else. So thank you for having me.